Now, if you're a collector of Chinese antiques, this is probably the most important video you'll ever watch. And I would say that this is probably also the most important video that I'll ever make. I want to tell you a story about a bird cage, a catalog, and a girl named May. Now, May grew up in a developed country, fully Western, although May was ethnically Chinese. So she had some exposure to Chinese culture, and she even had some language skills in that May spoke some Putonghua, although this wasn't her mother tongue. It's perhaps these characteristics that led May to take a job in Beijing. And so May moved to Beijing. She excitedly explored the city. She went to bars, she went to restaurants. She even met a guy who she started dating. Now that guy was a snowboarder. He taught snowboarding. And because of that, he spent at least half of every week in the mountains outside of Beijing in Miyun. So he didn't want to spend all this money on a nice Beijing apartment because half of the time he wasn't there. And so he found a roommate. And interestingly enough, that roommate was working in the Chinese antiques industry. So one day, maybe after a year of being there or so, May had some friends visiting from overseas. So she took them to the Great Wall, to the Forbidden City, Tiananmen Square. She took them out for the nightlife. And finally, for an even more interesting slice of culture, she took them to the Beijing antique market. Now, May knew that probably a lot of the items in this antique market was fake. But because May was ethnically Chinese and had some exposure to Chinese culture and spoke some Putonghua, May thought that she could probably find a treasure in there anyway. She could probably find some real antiques. So while they were going through the market, they stumbled across some old paintings. There was a section of that market that dealt exclusively with paintings. They were ink wash paintings, Chinese style, calligraphies, these sort of things. The seller told them that these were definitely antique and were worth a lot of money. He was also asking for a lot of money. Now, May suddenly remembered that her her boyfriend's roommate was working in the antiques industry. So she gave him a call. Now, he assured her that those paintings were definitely fake and that she should not spend her money on those paintings. She had a little bit of trouble accepting that. May was a little bit stubborn, a little bit insistent, but he explained 100%, 1000%, those paintings are fake. Don't waste your money. So May let go of the paintings and continued on through the market, convinced that she will be able to find a treasure there. At some point, they stumbled upon an old man with a blanket spread out on the ground in the corner of the antique market with a number of interesting curios laid out on the blanket. Old jades, porcelain, maybe some beads, some figurines. And in the mixture was a very interesting little brass birdcage. Now, this birdcage was not your average birdcage. First of all, it was very small. Very, very small. The second thing about it is, inside the birdcage was a little feathered bird. And if you wound up the birdcage, the bird would actually slowly rotate. So what May had found was actually a clock. And as the second hand on the clock turns, the bird would turn. So this was an antique clock. This was a very, very cool little curio item. May had never seen anything like that. It was brass. It had a little bit of patina on the brass, and it just was spectacular. She asked the seller if it was old or if it was new. Old, of course. Definitely old. She asked the price, he gave her price, she negotiated the price fiercely, eventually winning the bargaining session, and paid the money and got the antique birdcage. Now, she was quite excited about her find, and so she called her boyfriend's roommate and said, "Hey, I found this amazing little antique clock in the shape of a birdcage. It's amazing, it's so cool, I gotta show it to you." "Sure," he said, "no problem. Come by the office." Now, his office was not very far from the antique market, so May sent her guests back to the hotel to rest, jumped in a taxi, and rushed to her friend's office. Hopped in the elevator, upstairs, down the hall, to the reception desk. The receptionist said, "Sure, he's there, go right in." Now, as she walked into his office, he was probably finishing an email or something like that, and said, "Give me 1 minute, let me just finish typing this out." And so as May walked over to the chair next to his desk to sit down, to wait, she noticed a catalog on his desk, a catalog that was open. And she looked at the catalog and she saw that actually it was filled with clocks of all shapes and all sizes. And it just happened to be that her birdcage was in that catalog on the very page that was opened up on his desk. Her clock was a reproduction. It wasn't a valuable antique. It was a fake, and it was made in the thousands. And he had just happened to have placed an order for 50 of those clocks for a customer of his who sold them as decor items. In this video, I'm going to try to help you understand why there is a huge chance that your Chinese antiques are in fact actually fakes, copies, reproductions. We're going to talk about the way the industry works. We're going to talk about how these things make their way into the market. We're going to talk about how they make themselves from the market into your hands. And we're going to talk about the size and scale of this. Now, I've thought a lot about this. This is a difficult video to make because I need to communicate a lot of information. I need to communicate years upon years of experience. And that's not an easy thing to do. But we're going to have a try. And I hope when we're done, you're going to walk away with a better sense of what you're up against. Now you're probably thinking, what is this crazy guy saying? How dare he? I have read lots of books. I've handled lots of objects. Who the hell does this guy think he is? I would be saying that too. Bear with me for a moment though. Before we move forward though, we need to go backwards, and I need to teach you specifically how the antique Chinese furniture industry works. Notice I said antique Chinese furniture. That's very important. So this means Chinese antique furniture, Chinese reproduction furniture, where it comes from, how it travels, where it goes. As we go forward, you will see why this is so important. Oh, one other thing that's very important before we start. I want you to pay attention to the items I show and see if you can figure out which items are real and which items are fake. At the end of the video, I'll reveal which of them were real and which of them were fake. Okay, let's get started. Let's get started at the very, very beginning. If you are a retail shop and you need product, in order to get that product, retailers go to trade shows. At trade shows, they buy their product from wholesalers. Now, wholesalers are businesses that import product directly. In this case, of course, this will be product directly from China. Now, some retailers do import product directly. It doesn't really matter. In this case, all that matters that you need to pay attention to is that somebody imports the product. So, these folks, these wholesalers or maybe retailers, they will go to China on a buying trip. They will visit warehouses. They will select products. The products will get picked up. They will get photographed in the warehouse. They will get packed, and then they will get shipped abroad, usually in a shipping container. Not always, sometimes less than a container, but most of the time in a container. And then anywhere from weeks to a month or two, it will arrive on the other side. Sometimes this will go to a warehouse, and then this trade show where the items are then sold on the retail shops. Other times it will go directly to the retailer. Again, doesn't really matter who does this. What matters is that somebody is importing. Now, if you've ever been to one of these Chinese antique furniture shops, you'll see that there's more than just furniture there. You'll see there's big pieces, the furniture, but then there'll be smaller pieces as well. Now, the style of these stores will vary slightly where you're at in the world, but generally the format is the same. These smaller pieces, not the furniture, but the smaller pieces, this is what the industry calls smalls. So this is the first concept that you really need to understand. Smalls. That's what they're called, smalls. And this is very important. This is very important because there's a very specific reason why these smalls exist. You see, when you buy one-off individual pieces of furniture, it means every item is odd-sized. Different height, legs, chairs. It's like when you're loading the container, it's like solving a three-dimensional puzzle in terms of maximizing the space in the container of what you can use. So some pieces of furniture, they also waste space inside the furniture. For example, let's say you have a large cabinet or a large chest. Inside is wasted space. So what importers do is they buy smalls in order to fill up that wasted space. Smalls, they drop down the shipping costs per item in the container because you're now mathematically, of course, fitting more items into the container. Or some wholesalers will just think of it as the furniture is what's paying for the shipping price, and the smalls basically have free shipping. So it's win-win. Almost everybody buys some quantity of smalls. Now, let me show you what these smalls may look like. So, for instance, perhaps you have some lovely hammered Tibetan silver, or maybe some Tang Dynasty tri-colored pillows. You might have carved cinnabar lacquer. Scholar's rocks always look really nice. Maybe some antique carpets, Ming figurines, or blue and white ceramic is always popular. Who doesn't like blue and white ceramic? So all of these things get packed up, they get shipped out, and they end up in the shops. And they look great in shops too, by the way. Now, this is where things start to gradually get just a little bit mixed up. So as I said, this is where things start to get a little bit mixed up. Here's the problem. When you see a single item in a very nice shop, these items look very unique at first. They may even look extraordinarily rare. Wood carvings will look great until you have been to the wood carving warehouse. Antique Chinese lacquer boxes will be beautiful as well until you know the box seller. Bronze statues always look good until you've been to the brass lady's warehouse. And who wouldn't want a rare Han Dynasty jar, until you suddenly realize there are suspiciously 4 other identical ones. Cast iron. I could talk for cast iron about hours. One of my personal favorites. Very rare until you've seen rows and rows and rows of the same identical ones. We're going to come back to cast iron. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. So things are not always what they seem. And the presentation really matters. But that does not make for an antique. These items may look antique in the shop, but not when you know where they're coming from or when you've seen the catalog. Now you might be saying, these people are selling fakes. But that's actually not what is happening. Now we'll get to that in a moment. A lot of it is just misunderstanding. But hang on, and we'll address that shortly. Let's address the other thing first that you might be thinking, which is, who is this guy, and who the hell died and put this arrogant prick in charge? I mean, how could he possibly know any of this? This guy is crazy. Well, I know this because this was my job. I assume by now you've realized that May was my roommate's girlfriend, and the office she was visiting was, of course, my office. You see, part of my business back then was assisting wholesalers to find items to go into their containers of antique and reproduction furniture. A lot of what we did was we would buy unrestored antiques, we would restore them, and then we would sell them to these wholesalers. But we also helped them find smalls to fill up the spaces. Everybody does that, actually, in the industry. So I actually know quite a lot about this world. This was my world for almost 20 years, day in and day out. If I was not in the factory, then I was in the real antique market. And if I wasn't in the real antique market, I was in the fake antique market. I would eat, sleep, and dream these things 24/7, year after year. I had no life, actually. This was all I did. But that's another story for another video. So again, you're thinking, how do these things end up in your hands as antiques? And we will get to that. But there is one more very important concept you need to understand before we can answer that question, and that is scale. You see, this is a massive, massive operation. People don't understand this. Let's use some cocktail math to illustrate this. Now, these are really rough numbers. We'll start with our shipper in Beijing as an example. Let's say he did 2 containers a day for 6 days a week, 11 months a year. Now, that's pretty common. They usually take a year off for Chinese New Year. They usually work 7 days a week, so we'll shorten it to 6. Pretty common numbers. That would make 528 containers a year. Now, for a very, very long time, there was at least 4 main consolidators in Beijing. 4. Doing the exact same thing. So that's about, 2,112 a year, if my math is correct. Now, some factories do their own containers as well. Let's just say 20 factories doing 4 containers a month, very low numbers. So that would be 44 containers. That makes 880 containers a year. Yeah? So these are pretty low estimates, but these are reasonable estimates. So you're looking at 2,992 per year from Beijing. These are containers shipped out of this sort of stuff. Now, there are many containers sent out of other kinds of products. We're just talking about antique reproduction style furniture, antique and reproduction style furniture, with smalls in the containers as well. So, we're going to do this over 25 years because this has been going on for much longer than 25 years. But let's use 25 years as a baseline. that would actually make 74,800 containers a year. Over 25 years from Beijing. 74,800. Oh, I forgot. That's just Beijing. Shanghai, Ningbo, Guangzhou, Zhuhai. These were also major exporting centers of these sort of products. So we need to times that by what, 5? So that's 374,000 containers of this stuff sent out over the past 24 years, or 25 years. Now, let's assume that every container only has 40 of these kind of products. Just 40. Now, a lot of containers were jam-packed with them, but we're just going to average out with really low numbers, like minimal numbers. So let's just say every container only had 40 smalls in it of any kind. That would be what? 374,000 times 40 containers. Oh my gosh, it's a lot of math. That would be, wow, 14,960,000 small items sent out over the world over the past 25 years. These are conservative numbers. The real numbers are much greater. Much greater. The point is, the scale here is absolutely massive. There are entire industries devoted to making these sort of products. Not hundreds of thousands or thousands of people, millions of people are employed in this industry making these kind of products. This is massive. Even we shipped out a ton of containers. So when you look at what's on the market today in terms of antiques, let's break it down like this. First, you have old collections. This will vary, of course, depending on the country, its contact with China, whether or not it had a large Chinese population, these sort of factors. You can call it the result of collecting, you can call it looting, trade between countries. It doesn't really matter. Let's just say these are collections that were formed 100 years ago. And it's about this much. Now, let's add on legitimate trade with China before the 1990s, which is basically the last, 90 plus years, yeah? These are things like Chinese state-run enterprises exporting goods. This is just general trade between countries, things that people brought back from travel there, and so on. So let's just say it's about this much. Now, most of the time, rich people buy good pieces from top dealers. They buy real pieces. They don't buy from online auctions. And even 100 years ago, they didn't buy from those sort of environments. They weren't treasure hunters. They bought from good dealers. When they sell that stuff, the same rule applies. It doesn't go onto internet auction sites. It doesn't go to a local auction house. It goes to one of the top big 3 auction houses, Sotheby's, Christie's, Bonhams. Now I know this because I know these kind of people. I deal with them and I know what they're like and how they operate, okay? So if you think that those sort of nice pieces are ending up in the market, you're kidding yourself. That's really not what's happening. So we need to take that percentage away from the market in terms of picking and what finds you might have. So let's take that away. Let's say it's about this much. Now, let's factor in the effect of professionals and mainland Chinese in the last 20 years or so. Anything that is real and anything that is good is probably going to be scooped up either by a professional who has spent a lot of time to acquire a lot of money and probably also has resources, or by mainland Chinese who in general they have a better sense of what to look for, They're starting off with a bit of advantage, and they are relentless about buying these things. They are vacuuming things up at an alarming rate. So let's say it's about that much. We have to subtract that out of what's available in terms of pickings. Now, let's factor in the things that have been brought in the last 25 years or so. And that probably looks like this. Aren't the odds of winning the lottery like 1 in 6 million? How about casinos? Searching for real items in that sort of environment it's really no different than gambling. In fact, slot machines probably have better odds. So, it's a little depressing, but that is the reality. So how do they end up in your hands as antiques? Well, for most retailers, no one is selling fakes. This is very important to put out there, to emphasize. They're just selling Asian home decor items and replicas for people to decorate their homes with. This is not about selling fakes. And most of them are not labeled as antique. They're labeled as such. Now, yeah, it would be fun to paint this as some sort of massive conspiracy, but it's just not true. And the truth is just much more boring. It's just the home decor industry. Plain and simple. Nothing more to it than that. However, they do end up in the market as fakes, and being sold as actual antiques. So how does that happen? Well, one way, one way is mom buys one of these Asian decor items, or dad buys one, whatever. Later on they move, they downsize, maybe the daughter helps out, doesn't know what it is, sells it at a yard sale, puts it online on eBay, sends it to the Goodwill, okay? Or somebody doesn't want it, they donate it to a charity, local thrift store, Goodwill, as I already mentioned. Or perhaps they actually pass away. People die. And it ends up in an estate sale. But with no documentation, no provenance, no history, and so whoever is doing the listings just assumes it is antique. So what happens is Asian home decor suddenly becomes a potential antique find for some collector. So now that's a lot, and that's how most of it makes its way into the marketplace. But not all. But that's how most of it makes its way in. And they get bought, they get sold, they get traded amongst collectors. People write forum posts online. Other people assure them that those pieces are real because those pieces look correct, because they're also part of this. They're also doing the same thing without even realizing it. A second way it ends up on the market is that some mainland Chinese sellers are just misleading buyers. So some wholesalers actually bring in stuff genuinely believing it's antique. Like this gentleman. Ironically, his answer was in his own post. Banned from export, but miraculously showed up again. Woo! Amazing! Come on, use your brain. So some of them are naive enough to just take the China side vendors at face value. Other times they are just arrogant, believing that they're smarter. And unfortunately, this seller is a good example of that. They jet off to China for a week or two a year, and they think that makes them an expert. And sellers in mainland China are very much able to take advantage of this by pandering to their ego. My favorite is when they tell me, oh, I know Mr. Joe for years. He and I are good friends. No, you're not friends with Mr. Joe. You're just somebody who gives him money because you buy his product. That's not a friendship. So that's a factor here. Let me show you the way a typical interaction works between a foreigner and these Chinese vendors. Hi, Mr. Chen. Is this piece old?
Yes. Older. Older.
Old? Okay. Oh, good price. Nice piece. Good find. Now let me show you how that interaction works with me. 这东西是老的还是新的？老的，肯定是老的。你治安是老的吗？100%是老的。哼，不会骗你。你认识老张吗？他是河北人，那工厂在山东。我觉得这是老张的货，我去过他的工厂好多次，也买过他的货好多次。你觉得我傻逼吗？我干了多少年？这东西100%是新的。哇，你怎么认识老张？你好聪明，非常聪明。So these type of wholesalers are quite arrogant. Telling the truth will just get you blasted, and they don't want to know anyway. But the problem here is they're passing that lie along to you as well. My personal favorites, and I said we would get back to this, are the cast iron tubs. Now, I had a conversation with a very unpleasant Brit dealer who stuck to the claim that his was real. Now, you cannot export these under any circumstances, nor have you been able to for years. I know exactly how this works, having seen it firsthand. I know intimately how the export process works. I know intimately how sellers will self-censor in what they try to export to not get in trouble. I know how customs inspects containers at the port. I have quite a lot of experience in this area. And I've been to the factory, and I've watched them being made. You can even order them in all different age finishes, whatever age finish you want. So these days, they are all copies. But some folks simply just won't listen. A third way, which has really ramped up in these past few years, is unscrupulous mainland Chinese sellers, usually selling direct online. And sometimes they may even have a retail store, a brick and mortar retail store. But a lot of it is online. There's a lot on eBay, Etsy, online auction sites, endless fakes, massive quantities. And there is no big brand to drive any crackdown on these sort of items. So for example, if you were selling Chanel bags, there would be an industry lobbying group lobbying the government, customs authorities, port authorities to crack down on these things. But this doesn't exist for the antiques industry. So this is really a 100% legal scam and is very profitable. So you have to add in that those things also get bought as antiques, and they end up in people's collections, and they end up getting resold, as you guessed it, antiques. Now, there is one last way these items end up on the market. And if you harken back to the guy selling cast iron who doesn't want to believe it's a fake, some of you watching this video are going to believe that you're too clever to fall for any of this. You're going to think that you've read enough books and you've handled enough pieces that you know what you are doing. So I'm talking to you. There is something called gaofang. Gaofang is high fake, basically, high-end fake. And these items look a lot more convincing. They are much harder to spot, and they are made to deceive. we're not even talking about reproduction level deceiving, just they are made to be passed off as antiques. If you look at this particular popular online auction site, there are dozens of sellers who are specialized in selling just this sort of item. They even have softwood furniture. They fake everything, and some of them look very, very, very convincing. But again, you may think you know what you're doing, but you have no idea what you're up against. These are people who they have spent their entire lives making fakes, and they have access to reference materials in a language that you don't speak, in Chinese. They have better access to museums, auction house pieces, private collections. They will almost always be ahead of you. So what can you do about it? Well, if you've watched my other videos, one of the things I've repeatedly said is that you need to buy real pieces. You need to handle real pieces. And in order to do that, you need to buy from reputable dealers. When you are buying these fakes, you are polluting your eyes. You are starting from a false proxy. You're starting from the wrong reference point. So that's the first thing you can do. The second thing you can do is stop picking. Stop treasure hunting. Again, the chances of you finding that treasure are like 1 in a gabillion. And again, you're polluting your eyes. Now, we can talk about these things extensively. How do you spot certain fakes? And that's best left for other videos. We can't do any of that in this video. That's not what this video is about. But those two pieces of advice will always stand. Oh, and for the ceramics people, because I can hear some ceramics person out there saying, well, I have all these great pieces and they're all real. So this is going to be my regular reminder that ceramics are generally not rare and not really that valuable. They exist in massive quantities. Now there are some exceptions, there are some rare pieces, but for the most part, massive quantities. China has been exporting ceramics around the world for hundreds and hundreds of years in huge quantities. We still find ships regularly that have sunk, that are filled to the brim with ceramics. So if you manage to find some real pieces, that's probably why. Or equally likely is perhaps what you have is not real and it's a fake. Now please don't shoot the messenger for saying that. One last thing. You can't imagine how difficult it is to pick images for this video. I have thousands upon thousands of images of so many fakes of all kinds and shapes. Very difficult. Very, very difficult. There is not a single class of antique out there that is not being faked. And that includes some very obscure items, things that you would never imagine that somebody would waste time to be faking. No, somebody has put a lot of effort and time and money into faking them and faking them in large quantities. This is just the fact. So, I said that I would reveal which items in the video were fake and which items were real. Well, drum roll please. Aside from the antique furniture, every single item in this video is fake. There's not a single item I showed you that was real. All of them were fakes. Every single one. So, if you like the video, or even if you hate the video, let me know. Click the subscribe, do all that good stuff so that I know you want more videos. And remember, if you're going to buy antiques, you need to do your own research, a lot of research. You need to buy from reputable dealers. Any reputable dealer will have done the work that you're probably going to be unable to do yourself unless you can become full-time. And if you're not doing that, you're training your eyes in fakes, and that is not a good thing. Until next time.